Welcome to the license change proposal. What I'm going to be doing is going through the proposal from the ACMA and give you some ideas about the differences between what they're proposing and not proposing. This came from a paper that was put together by the Spectrum Strategy Committee, and that's the composition of the Spectrum Strategy Committee and the sort of experience that we bring to this particular exercise. We came up with a paper that's available on the WIA website, and it actually forms the content for the survey that's about to go out to everybody's mailbox, either tonight or tomorrow morning. So, and it goes through an analysis of each of the options through an opportunity and risk arrangement, and this actually forms the presentation structure that Dale and Gilbert came up with for the Canberra Region Amateur Radio Club not that long ago, and I asked Dale and Gilbert whether I could actually use it for tonight, so they've graciously let me use this. I thought there was no reason to reinvent the wheel. So yeah, that's where we're at. And Martin.
No, just continue on. You can cover what I asked about as you go along.
Okay. Martin quite rightly puts, this was raised by the ACMA probably 10 years ago, about then. And they put the class licence fairly firmly on the table, and it was very firmly rejected by the amateur service in Australia. In fact, I think it was one of the largest response rates they'd ever had. And so it's just very interesting that they're putting this back on the table. And it is all around, if you read the proposed changes from the ACMA, they hang a carrot in front of our eyes, which is this means it'll be a free licence, and of course it will reduce all of this red tape, etc., etc., etc. So that's the I suppose the incentive that they're putting forward. Now, whether it will deliver that or not, I have my concerns, and yeah, that's what tonight's all about. I'm going to present both sides, and it's up to you guys to actually come to a decision, and also hopefully make a submission to the ACMA in some way, shape or form, and I'll go through that in a couple of slides' time. So there's a few questions which Dale and Gilbert have posed, which is, number one, do we actually think there is too much regulation to start with? And are the actual existing regulations as they currently stand don't seem to be enforced anyway? And I cite two key areas there, which is one, which is interference. Interference to us or interference to other services. If it's interference to a commercial service, they seem to enforce it, but if it's interference to us, it's somewhat at their discretion. But the other area is EMC, so electromagnetic compatibility, for goods that are coming into Australia. They don't seem to be enforcing that terribly heavily either, because we are finding that there is a lot of goods that are coming in which clearly don't meet electromagnetic compatibility guidelines, and so there's a concern in a couple of those areas. Will this change that? Probably not. Don't know. But who knows? Probably some of some good and definitely some bad aspects of the proposals. We'll do a bit of do the good bits outweigh the bad bits? Do us, it being a free licence for life, does that outweigh some of the things that we potentially may lose? I'm not sure. And also, looking forward and looking probably a bit more strategically, does this actually contribute to a better longer term outlook for amateur radio? or not. So have a think about that. We need, and I don't like this terminology, but we need some situation that enables us to actually demonstrate to the ACMA that we're hearing them from the point of view of they want it to be less regulatory burden for them, and obviously they less work for them. But we also have some concerns which we think need to be addressed if we were to go down a class licensed pathway. So anyway, any questions at this stage? Okay. Few things that which is more around process than anything else. Submissions, the closing date for submissions is the 2nd of April. What you need to do, and hopefully don't rely on this presentation, please do your own reading, do your own looking on the web. Just be a little bit careful because there is some stuff out there which is quite misleading. That seems to be circulating right at the moment. So probably go to the sources that you are confident with. We are putting together a poll, the WIA, that will be going out either tonight or tomorrow. So you'll see that in your inbox. It's very simple. It's only a couple of questions, so it will take you not very long. And there are some recommendations that the WIA are making. If you want to go that way, you're quite welcome to go that way. Obviously, if we present a consensus view to the ACMA, because one of the things the ACMA is playing on a little bit right at the moment is a bit of disunity in the amateur community. And so it would be good to present a sort of a unified front to them. In here we've talked within the committee as to whether we actually want to make a Reast response ourselves, because I think get as many responses to it into the ACMA as we can. And a key thing here, given our recent the regulator stepping into reminding everyone that they need to be polite and respectful, you just need to do that out of common courtesy. So, but also well informed. So you're actually answering the questions that they're posing, instead of going off on some rant about something else. So focus it on what they're actually asking for, and contribute to the debate around this particular issue. Okay, this is structured in apparatus on one side and class on the other, and the various the differences. Right at the moment, we pay an annual fee. What they're proposing with the class license is there's no annual fee. In fact, there's no license fee at all. So this is a big incentive for people. Amateurs are sort of known for their deep pockets and short arms. So this is appealing. This is the carrot that gets that's in front of us. So okay, there's some good stuff in here. One of the concerns that is not made clear in here in the proposal is around the fact that they are going to a class license to replace all of the non-assigned apparatus licenses. So for those people who don't know what a non-assigned apparatus license is, it's the license that we hold. An assigned apparatus license is like a repeater. So they're not proposing to change the apparatus licenses for repeaters. That stays exactly the same as it is. There's a few changes around who can assign frequencies that they're proposing, which we think is actually a good thing, because they're actually sort of deregulating that area a little bit, which is good for amateur repeaters, which is good. But one of the key things here is what we end up with is not ending up on the licence register. We won't be on the licence register. So you won't be able to go to the RADCOM database and go, oh, who's VK7TW? Because we won't be there. We actually won't be there. It's held by a third party and they look after the call signs. So,
Will they put that on the web?
sorry?
The third party put that on the web?
Well, they could, but there are some privacy hoops that they have to jump through, which are the privacy hoops that the WIA is currently jumping through, because that's why we're probably not going to see a call book in 2021.
Okay. And QRZ.com, we won't be on.
Well, QRZ.com's separate system altogether.
Published.
So and it's controlled by you as to what people actually see. So this is likely to be no public information. So our concern is you won't know whether that somebody's licensed or not. Won't know whether they're a pirate or not, because you won't have anything to go to. So the ACMA go on a lot about self-regulation in the amateur service, and we won't be able to self-regulate because we won't know who's licensed and who's not.
Can we go back to the first point of the annual licence renewal?
Yep.
Because it says that other countries have licensing for life.
Yep.
This is not permitted under the Act. Well, Acts can be changed.
Correct.
So I think there's no reason to think that our existing apparatus licence couldn't be changed to be a licence for life.
Well, good point, Linda. And just recently, at the end of last year, the Act was actually changed so that apparatus licences went from 5 years to up to 20 years.
Mm.
That sounds like life to me.
And some people... But they also cite in the paper that there is very little take-up of a 5-year licence.
Because there's no financial incentive to us.
Correct.
So if you give me a financial incentive, I would renew my licence for 5, 10, 20
Oh, spot on.
or
Because-
however long you wish.
Yeah, correct. Because their formula is whatever it costs you for a year, you times that by 5 and that's the 5-year cost.
Yeah, well,
Hang on, how's that work?
so rubbish to the first point.
Correct.
Sorry.
And the interesting thing is the Act has just changed so that it is 20, it's actually 20 years.
Yeah, so that which is not permitted under the Act is
So,
not useful.
Good
We
point.
should add here that the ACMA is not known for their truthfulness. I've been dealing with them on the power thing for the last year and a half, and I've had to take a senior manager to task, and she's accepted that I was told lies in one of the letters she signed.
okay.
So let's be careful that we interpret anything they say with some research to find out what the true facts are.
Yes, yeah. And excellent point, Martin. And can I just say, there are 3 options in the paper, which is the apparatus licence, a modified apparatus licence, which is option B, and a class licence, which is option C. Now, there is very little detail in the proposal for the B option. And in fact, the committee came to the conclusion that we can't make a decision on B because there's not enough information in there around a modified apparatus licence. I think it's been put in there as a bit of a token, because we can't just put up 2 options and pick one of them. It's that sort of thing. So anyway,
When you say pick one, they're not necessarily going to respond to what we vote for anyway.
potentially not. Although, the interesting thing, Rex, is they bang on, and I purposely use that term, about them being a consultative organisation. So they go through, they've got quite a well-developed consultation framework, and they go through all of these releases of information paper and there's opportunity to respond and all of that sort of thing. If they go through that and then just pick the option that they want, even though there is a clear response and feedback that's not the option that people want, the actual cohort wants, I think they'd be not in a good place with the powers that be. So they're certainly they'll take notice. The amount of notice, I don't know. That's yet to be seen.
I think one of my concerns is, and this is because I'm a newcomer to amateur radio, but I've spent quite a bit of time on the class license bands, i.e. what we call CB radio,
CB, yeah,
UHF radio.
Yep.
And I think one of the concerns that I have is that I go, right, okay, I go on to a transmitter and here's my call sign, I am VK7TW, whatever. Whereas if they move to a class license, then we get with the greatest respect to them, the Muppets and Pranks that are all over the UHF bands that and you know, the number of times I've just sat there going, let's go turn off the mics, I've had no obscenities for this evening. And that's my concern is, even though yes, there's a lot of limits to what I can do as a brand new amateur, I'd rather maintain that little bit of control we've got.
Yeah. And we, bear in mind, we're not removing the requirement for you having a license. That's actually built into the class license proposal. That is one of the conditions under a class license. You need to have one of 3 licenses, and here's the conditions that operate around that. So what they've tried to do is sort of shoehorn what we've got now in an apparatus license into a class license. So that's sort of what they've tried to do.
Sorry, I got confused.
Excuse me, Justin.
Yeah.
With the apparatus, with the class license, how does it define the apparatus? Is it defined as like?
Yeah, but there's no concept of it being an apparatus that you're licensing under class.
But in terms of, you must have to have some guidelines for the apparatus to know that it complies with the class.
Yeah. Hold that thought, Kim,
Okay.
because there is a proposal for guidelines. And I'll go into what the issues with guidelines are.
So 10 kilowatts could be 15.
So the other issue with there not being evidence, like an artefact, which is a license that you can show somebody when you go overseas. The other issue is that if there isn't an artefact, actually travelling overseas as an amateur becomes a whole lot more difficult. And there's a number of people on the Spectrum Strategy Committee who have operated overseas and have said, if I didn't have that piece of paper, I would have had my radios taken away from me when I stepped off the plane in customs or whatever. So there's a bit of a concern about how they meet the CEPT requirements and the fact that you actually need an artefact that has the CEPT conditions on it, so it makes sense to another country around this. License conditions determination. So the LCD, quite a well-known process, quite a well-known instrument. There are defined processes to change it and go through. There's scrutiny at a sort of a parliamentary level when things like that are put up, and there's committees that go through that sort of that level of legislation. The class license is still, it's obviously still legislation because it is still an instrument that is defined under the Radio Communications Act. So it is still a legal instrument, but it is a different sort of license. We don't know what the difference is between the class license and the license conditions determination, so the current arrangement that we've got. We're still trying to find out what sort of level of scrutiny and consultation that goes through in comparison with the determination. It's not defined, and so it's just some area which we're a bit concerned about. The amateur service, now this is one area that we are very concerned about because must not, what it says in the LCD, must not cause harmful interference to radio communications. So very well defined. What it actually says in the proposal is must not cause interference to other services, but what they've slipped in here is the word devices. And so we have a concern that if they are going down the path of including the services, which we're used to now, but if they're going down the path of a device, that is interference to that device or interference to us from that device. And under a class license, the feeling is that we would have absolutely no power to do anything if we were experiencing interference from that device or causing interference to that device. And that device can be next door's LCD television. So it's not clear. And not,
Plasma television.
oh, well, or but plasma television to you,
Yeah.
or you to that particular television. So
Or you to an audio thing that's wide open at the front end.
correct.
Or a garage door opener.
So they've slipped in device, which we just have a bit of concern about, and the class license is unclear on it. So
The concern there is that if that device has got any sort of, as I say, antenna leak, and it's going to pick up stuff.
oh no,
it shouldn't
well,
be doing.
well and truly, and there's no comeback under the class license. Yeah, okay, under the apparatus license, homemade equipment, while it's not actually named up in any way, shape or form or defined in the draft, we're a bit concerned about how under a class license homemade equipment, even if it complies with all the other things in the class license around interference and spurious emissions and all sorts of stuff, how that would actually be treated. Because under other class licenses, it's specifically, the class license defines the specific equipment that you can operate under, and it's got to meet these power levels, this etc., all these conditions. So it's sort of silent in the draft. Not quite sure how that will pan out.
Yeah,
Not. Yep. No, go.
there's a section here that says licensing of radio communication devices, and it says under sections of the Act, it's unlawful to possess or operate a radio communications device in Australia unless it is authorised by licence. So, I mean, this is saying that already you can only use the devices that are licensed. And I'm thinking that I, as a radio amateur, should be the thing that is licensed, not the equipment.
I agree. And that's what I mean about there's just not enough information in there. And what they've tried to do is shoehorn the apparatus license into the class license. So that's a bit of a concern for us. EMR currently is covered. We have some specific things that we have to comply with in relation to electromagnetic radiation. They are specified in a separate document. There is nothing about EMR in the LCD, in our amateur LCD. However, it's defined in another document. And it is defined and structured in what we think is a much simpler way, because there's a level 1 and a level 2, which is power-based. What they have done is introduced the ARPANSA standard, which has just been released. It's actually only been released about 2 weeks ago, the new standard. And basically in the class license it says you will comply with this. And I, to be brutally honest, I had a look through this. It stretched my mathematics. So I'm just, my worry is that there would have to be some sort of framework or guidelines or some way that the average amateur would be able to interpret that and then actually apply it to their station. So, and the comment that we put in the paper was the implications right at the moment are unclear, and the comments by the professional guys who are having to do this professionally said the average amateur wouldn't be able to afford the software for a start, let alone the equipment, etc., etc. So it's just a little bit of a concern that what we've now done is the ARPANSA standard is firmly in the class licence, and it is not a simplified structure. It is actually just basically citing you will comply with this standard.
No CB radio installed in a car meets that standard. Even at the low power, even if it's not operating higher power.
So,
meet that.
so it's just unclear. That's the bottom line. How it will actually affect, and also how it will then be applied by the ACMA.
The problem we got with the ACMA on this is that they don't understand it.
Okay.
They have nobody on board who understands it. They call in a consultant from time to time on this issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Who works for ARPANSA.
Yep.
But it's not clear that they understand radio technology.
Yep.
They've come from a mathematical modelling.
A radiation side. Yeah. Okay. So it's just unclear. The problem is it's unclear, and can you make a decision on it being unclear? I'm not sure you can. There's some interesting stuff in here around the 50 to 52 megahertz side of it. There is a specific clause in here around restrictions in this particular area. And I think we came to the conclusion that there is obviously some other pressure from some other areas on the ACMA around 50 to 52 megahertz. So again, unsure of the implications, but may allow others to operate within the band, which we will have to then coexist with, which we do in other bands. So okay, but there's just a specific call out for this space in the class license. So now there's I think Dale in his presentation the other night specifically called this out because he's an experimenter in these bands as well. What they did in the current apparatus license was basically put EIRP limits on these two bands, with no input power limits. So basically, and it took into account the fact that at these sort of frequencies the antennas are really inefficient. To get to the sort of EIRP limits that they specified, you would be running scary amounts of power to get the EIRP to get to the EIRP limits. But what they've done in the class license of the draft is put not only the EIRP limits in, but they've also put the transmitter power limits in there. So with those limits, you would very rarely be able to get to these sort of limits accordingly. So yeah, that's just one thing that we picked out. Okay, now this goes to Kim's question. A lot of what they call operational restrictions have been pulled out of here altogether, not in here. And the comment is that they would move all of this to a non-binding operational guide. Now the key thing is we don't know who's responsible for the guide. We have a concern if it's the ACMA.
Or it's the AMC.
Or it's the AMC, well and truly. They do make lots of comments in the proposal around, well, the AMC already do this for us, so, but leave it at that. So it's more than likely probably going to be the AMC, and I have a concern about that. These guidelines, there's just not enough information about where these guidelines are going to come from. We sort of know what's going to be in them, but where they actually come from, and whether there'll be other things put in the guidelines, I don't know. Are the ACMA trying to move us to a code of practice like the commercials, the television radio industry? Don't know. And codes of practice are run, they're industry self-regulation instruments. So are they trying to move the amateur service to a sort of an industry self-regulation? I don't know. It's certainly been discussed in the past. The comment there, greater use of third-party providers for administrative functions. And the AMC is mentioned a couple of times. And the comment there, yes, it's not encouraging. And we've got some examples of that in the room. So,
It only took 3 months, come on.
Because currently the AMC don't have any response or resolution timeframes. They've actually been removed. If you've watched Peter Parker's videos, they've actually been granted an exemption from deed. So there is no timeframes at all on any of their services, which just, I have a concern about that. So, the preliminary WIA view and the recommendation that we're making as part of the survey is the only option we've got available to us is to stick with what we've got, because the current class licence as it sits, there's a lot of concerns in there. However, what we're wanting to do, and part of the survey is around this, is to get a feeling from the amateur service that we believe that we can actually get a win-win situation with a class licence which will get the ACMA what they want and simpler administration, etc., etc., but it can address some of the issues that we've got. So what we're wanting to do is actually meet them halfway and see whether they would actually vary and change the class licence to include a number of the concerns that we've actually got. So yeah, that's we don't know whether they're willing to engage in the process or not, or whether they are just going to go ahead with it, or what they're going to do. I doubt they're just going to go ahead with it if they get a lot of negative responses. That's the bottom line.
I think loss of RAD comes one of the big ones that will be a major issue.
Yep. So, what's next? Please don't rely on what I've said. Read the papers. They're all available on the various websites. Read the class licence and see whether you can make sense of it, and your concerns around it. Certainly read the information that comes out with the survey, which is the same as what's up on the website now, so that won't change. And if you want to, if you're really having trouble sleeping, the papers is available. If you're not a WIA member, you can still participate in the poll. Basically what you do is head off to here or to there. The reason we want you to register is one of the concerns that the ACMA has expressed in the past is when certain organisations have gone out with polls that have absolutely no not restrictions, but no structure around it where you could vote multiple times if you really wanted to. They expressed a real concern about that particular arrangement, and so what the WIA's come up with is the polling system. So you register, you can vote once, it is known to be a valid. You have to validate because you have to log in, etc., etc. So this meets the ACMA's concerns around open polling and putting things out on the net and getting it all and sundry and whoever and robots and whatever else voting. So that's what that's about. Please make a submission. If you don't do anything else, please respond to it with how you want, with what your views are. There is a wonderful page in the proposal which says these are the things that we want addressed. So you can use that as a bit of a dot point to then go through and respond to it. And the thing that Dale says here, which is really valid, is do it before it closes, but leave it until close to when it's closing, because you can get the latest thinking from what's out there and the latest thoughts and advice that's coming out. Because numerous people have done videos. I know Peter Parker's done it, Hayden's done it, and this presentation for Canberra is up on the web. So people, and the feedback we've had is the ACMA is well and truly watching social media right at the moment, because they want to see what the response is. So please make a submission. So, yeah. Any questions?
A few years back there was that other, what do they call it, breakfast or something, organisation that was trying to compete with the WIA.
Yep.
Are they playing a role in this, or have they gone away?
Oh no. They're certainly they certainly put up an initial view and then they changed their view not that long after it. But they're certainly still out there, and they're still part of the landscape. So yeah.
Are they being positive or not so positive?
Oh, being how they normally are.
Not so positive.
I'm not going to comment.
With a normal class license, it's implicit in the fact that it's a class license, and they allocate your frequency, and you generally use specific equipment which has been built to comply with the service that you're operating in.
Correct.
So that sort of in some ways makes amateurs to comply with that, you become an appliance operator, because unless it's been built by a amateur sort of approved producer.
Type equipment.
Yeah, type equipment. So that would then mean that, like, if you're running military equipment, you might be out the door, and you certainly would be. It'd be very difficult to get through brew equipment, and then you sort of wonder, well, we're all going to be limited to a 3 metre width, because everything else is going to be non-type approved.
And not enough information.
Yeah, absolutely not enough.
So
I think initially when they produced the idea of the spectrum license, class license, apparatus license,
yep.
I lobbied very hard to the ACMA that they should not get rid of the operator license.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because we in fact are licensed as individuals.
Yes.
And not as, although they pretend we're apparatus, it's only because their structure doesn't allow for what we really are.
Correct.
And when I argued that when this was being created, it was perfectly clear that the intention of the ACMA was that amateur radio would become a big CB service with type approved equipment,
Class license.
little or no examination, no licensing structure as such, but pretty much anybody could join in as long as they used the type equipment.
Yep.
That was what the thinking was in their heads at the time. My view, from what I've read in this, they ain't changed much in the last couple of decades.
Oh no, they haven't. They certainly haven't. And the interesting thing, Martin, was, and one of the things that I very quickly formed a view on when the WIA put forward its proposal to the tender, to do the amateur examination service. In that proposal, we very clearly laid out I suppose a view that we were strategically looking at how we could improve the amateur service into the future, and it included, you know, it was a quarter of the cost of what it was normally, and we had a clear pathway in that proposal to put it online, which is how we were going to save money, and a clear, a clear roadmap for amateur radio in Australia. And it became very clear that the ACMA was not interested in the view that we had a clear pathway and roadmap for amateur radio in Australia. All they wanted to do was give it to somebody who they already knew, and they could provide the service the way they wanted to provide it. And the cost really wasn't an issue for them.
Well, they're not paying it, so of course.
Oh no, they're not. But the cost, the fact that we were trying to lower the cost, and they actually increased the cost, wasn't even a contributing factor. There was nothing about the future of amateur radio in Australia in that exercise.
Justin, do you have to apply, under this proposal, do you have to apply for a licence initially to be eligible to operate in that class? Or you just got to have the gear that operates?
You've just got to have an AOCP.
So you do need an AOCP?
You need, well and true.
And what, do you allocate your own call sign?
No. Well, see, this is the interesting thing. The call sign part of it, a bit earlier, is unclear, because what they're talking about is having a third party. This is one of those third party.
So ACMA again?
No, probably AMC, because AMC are already doing it.
Yeah, that's right.
But they would be the ones who would not only give you a database of the call signs that are available, but a database of the call signs that are out there.
So what they do is you pay no class fee for your licence, but you pay an annual fee for your call sign.
Quite possibly, because that's the only way that the AMC
fund themselves.
Correct. And they made it very clear that they were in it to make money.
Because they're part of the university. Yeah, okay.
But where's the legislation that allows them to charge an annual fee?
Good question, Steve. Very good question.
I've got another question too. What about repairs and maintenance of equipment?
Exactly.
Under a CV style class licence, you wouldn't get out.
You can't. No. And that's, sorry, I keep going back to this. Unclear, maybe more prescriptive, but not enough information. Don't know. Actually don't know.
And what about experimentation and innovation?
Well, the experimentation is covered because they have picked up the ITU definition of amateur radio in the start of the class licence. So the reason for amateur radio is experimentation, technical learning, etc., etc. So they have picked up the ITU definition of that. And let's face it, the only reason that amateur radio exists, I suppose, anywhere, in any country, is because there is the ITU radio regulations, number 19 and 25, that define the amateur service worldwide. So each country has signed up to that bit of legislation and that treaty. It's not a treaty. The international radio regulations, because of the fact that they're a member of the UN, the United Nations, so they have to comply.
So does that legislation or that document you just showed have anything to say about equipment and whether or not that's type approved equipment,
No.
etc.?
It's not enough information.
Well, except that there's this paragraph that says licensing of radio communication devices, which I read out earlier. It's unlawful to possess or operate a radio communications device in Australia unless it is authorised by a licence.
Correct.
You need
So
a
that-
licence for a CB?
But that could be misconstrued as it's a free for all.
Yeah.
We've already had the experience of ACMA field officers going to an amateur and saying you're not allowed to have that because it operates outside the amateur bands.
Correct.
But the onus is on the amateur to operate within their own licensed bands. So
Correct.
whether the radio operates outside those bands is irrelevant.
Well, that would be our view.
That would be our view, but that's not what the class
And-
license stuff would say.
And under a class license, how is that going to be interpreted? We don't know.
And defined. Not
We don't
interpreted, defined. Yeah.
So,
So does it give? So then it comes back to power limits. That'll be defined.
no, that's
And what
defined.
about modes?
Modes is defined.
Okay.
Class license in the draft of it, the proposed draft of it. You'll see stuff in there that looks very familiar out of the LCD because they've just picked it up and put it in here.
Right.
As well as other bits and pieces that you're not quite so familiar with. So
How does that reduce the regulation? You know, they're talking about reducing regulation.
oh,
One of the ways you could reduce regulation for amateurs would be to cut out all reference to modes,
no, correct.
as long as it sits within the band.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
I don't care what mode
it,
you're
it
on.
becomes self-regulation, and you'd probably find the band plans that have, bandwidths in it. You'd bring it into a. But this again is, does that become part of the guidelines, and who defines the guidelines? This is what I mean about it. There's just not enough information.
It's all too vague.
Does a class system in any way redefine amateurs' access to the spectrum?
No.
Well, I know that's under threat as well.
Oh no.
By different means.
I suppose it's constantly under threat.
Yes.
But it's certainly it's not it's silent on that sort of thing because I think there's other bigger hammers that they can use.
So we as amateurs have no more say over our access to spectrum than, say, a CV operator does. And if we do, what is that mechanism? The WIA?
No. Interesting question. I suspect it's the same, but it's the same for all spectrum users.
It's defined in the Act.
Correct. I just and it's defined in the amateur. The Australian radio frequency band plan, which is a piece of legislation. So
Well, bits of that get taken out and put in, don't
oh no,
they?
correct. And each WRC every 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
that gets negotiated.
Yeah.
Internationally. So yeah.
So it's a larger stage that's played out on.
It's a much larger
Yeah.
stage. It's an international stage. Larry.
Based on what you've read and what you've heard, what do you think the ultimate goal of the ACMA is?
Question on film.
Not sure I'm
Fair enough.
prepared. Not sure I'm prepared to answer that question. I think, and in fact, this goes a little bit to Martin's question. That how does this reduce the amount of regulation? Regulation comes in all forms. One of the bits of regulation that they have is the fact that the current apparatus license has, a tax component and a spectrum access component, and that's how they come up with the fee that we pay. They're just seeing all that go away. They don't have to do any of that sort of stuff. So administratively, it becomes a whole lot simpler for them. I think if
That's only computer work.
it's
paid for it.
an awful lot of manual work actually right at the moment, because I'm not sure how many people in this room didn't receive their reminder.
Yeah.
Can I just have a show of hands as to who didn't receive their reminder? Because I'm one of them.
I did, but forgot about it.
Oh, well, that's another thing.
Yeah.
But in the committee meeting that we had last night, all of us have experienced not getting the second letter. Just recently. We actually had to then contact the ACMA and go, my licence is coming up for renewal like tomorrow and I haven't received the second letter. And so they just fix it. And the response we got last night was, it sounds very much like the operator that you get on the end of the phone just says, oh, that's all right, we can fix that for you. As if this happens all the time.
For me, it happened at 9:05 Monday morning.
There you go. So
I got the email before I hung up.
What sort of period are people's licence renewals who are getting this treatment?
No, this is a year. This is yearly. This is annual.
No, but when is their licence coming up?
Well, mine comes up in October,
Mine came up in September and I was okay.
so maybe they have a system problem.
Well, that's right. Mine was fine this year, but last year I just forgot about it, and then I got a letter to say your licence is forfeited. And you're like, oh.
Well,
I got that letter too.
And look, they're very helpful when you actually ring them up and go, "This is the deal."
yeah.
Particularly helpful, but obviously it showed that there was an administrative error.
But if it goes past, I think 60 days, forget it. They're not very helpful. They just say you have to go back to the AMC and get a call sign, and then it all starts again.
I got that letter, I went and paid it straight away and I had my licence back within 2 days.
There you go.
But it's still only computer work.
I know it's still yeah. But
I mean, if they're running it manually,
yeah. Okay.
that's their problem.
If they want to really save money, they should just send the invoice out to pay a license and not bother with the preliminary.
Oh, yeah.
No, no.
That too.
Absolutely.
Like you don't get,
Like
you
every
don't
other
get,
business
It's
does.
a bureaucratic
get a letter to say
nichols.
you're about to get
No, no.
bundled.
But so moving from Martin's Martin's comment to Larry's question, I think they want it to be a self-regulated sector. So they want it like television and radio, that just looks after itself. Now, what that looks like, good question. Could look like all sorts of things, but I think that's they just don't want to do anything.
So
And
does that
it-
mean you can set up your own commercial television station and put it straight over the top of somebody else's TV station?
No, because that would be harmful interference.
True.
Well and truly.
Yeah.
But television and radio are also industries that generate an income.
Yeah, that's the difference.
No, correct, and they can throw money at it. They can well and truly, and have develop codes of practice which they can then actually regulate themselves and that sort of thing. So, but I think they want to wash their hands. That's my answer, Larry. I think.
I agree. Actually, the FCC has gone through this thing in the States. And they have a 10-year license, which is $50.
Yep.
Everybody got all upset and it was reduced to 35. Don't ask. There were thousands and tens of thousands of letters.
$15,000
They also established, the ARRL basically is taking over in a benign manner.
Yep.
And they have what they call official observers. And these are people that are authorized by the ARRL, who's authorized by the FCC, to patrol band edges and
Okay.
look for splatter and all kinds of.
So
pirates and-
intruder watch sort of stuff.
yeah, Intruder Watch is
Border
one of the,
Patrol.
one of the dynamic programs.
Yep.
And essentially, it's growing by leaps and bounds, and it's industry regulated because they have an interest in it. But you're talking about a huge number of members as versus the WIA and
correct.
a huge budget.
Correct.
But it is possible to move to an operator-based license system, and you can call it class here.
Well, we already had one.
We did have one.
And the gear is tested by laboratories
Yeah.
who then send the data to the FCC, who then certify it.
The
But there is a
ARRL.
central registry for licenses and for equipment.
Yeah. One of the interesting things that they quote numbers in here for the current licenses that are out there. And the conversation we had in the Spectrum Strategy Committee is actually they've understated it by about 5,000 to 6,000 people.
Really?
Because the move to the class license means you only need an AOCP. There are lots of people out there who didn't get a license, but they've got their AOCP. So the number of amateurs has actually been understated. Instead of it being about 15 to 16,000, it's more like about 20 to 21,000. Because there's all these people out there who have their AOCP, but they don't have a call sign or a license from the ACMA. So actually, potentially the amateur population goes up with a class license. All they need is to apply for the call sign in however they apply for their call sign. So yeah. Any other questions?
How about we suggest to the ACMA that we would accept a spectrum license which ran for 10 to 20 years and included all our current frequencies. And then we'd be prepared to have operator licenses sub-allocated underneath the spectrum license.
Interesting idea.
Because then we get something.
No,
We
correct.
get some guarantee of our spectrum
Yep.
for a particular period, which we don't have at the moment.
And then in 20 years' time, they'll probably come back to us and go, well, we're going to charge you now for your spectrum license and have a tender. I doubt they could do that, but it'd be an interesting...
They could try.
They could try.
I think they would bring a lot of unnecessary pressure on themselves if they did.
Anthony.
One of the carrots they're hanging in front of us is the low-cost license. Is it conceivable that with a class license and a third-party vendor, they could charge more per year than the ACMA?
Quite possibly. However, having said that, quite possibly yes. However, under the deed that is in place between the AMC and the ACMA, it is cost recovery. And the ACMA, as is all federal government departments, there is an incredibly well-defined cost recovery guideline that they police. And I only know that because we went through this exercise with the WIA. So it is cost recovery only. They would have to put a business case to the ACMA to say, we want to put these costs up due to whatever. And it would be on a case-by-case basis.
So doesn't that go against the idea of the ACMA, sorry, the AMC wanting to make a profit?
Well, yes. It's always against that. But that's why I suspect we saw their cost structure high from the start. They argued that their cost recovery was at this level, instead of saying it's at this level and then having to fight to get it up to this level. So they went high.
Are there any performance requirements in the cost recovery business agreement, or deed as you call it?
I don't think there's KPIs for the cost recovery side. You just have to prove you do have to report every year and provide your books to the ACMA accountants, because we went through that with the WIA each year.
But 5 months seems like a long time to wait to process paper.
I agree.
So what's the recourse somebody does, like this gentleman or this gentleman, to say, okay, it's been 5 months and I paid you the fee and you haven't performed? Isn't there some obligation of performance when you've been paid to do something?
Well, there used to be response and resolution times, so there used to be actual service metrics in there.
By virtue of the fact that they gave them an exception to deed is proof enough that
Correct.
They don't really care.
And in fact, they haven't. Our understanding is they haven't removed that exception. So the timeframes are not in there, are not required at this point in time.
Don't like the results, change the rules.
Do we get 10 people to drive up to Launceston on a Monday?
Well, I'm going up there on weekend, but that's other. I'm actually
there's some mean,
climbing mountains, but anyway.
Mean and ugly people down in Hobart will come drive up and ask them why they're not doing the paperwork.
I'll do the ugly bit.
I'll do the ugly too.
The recourse. Just going back to this, the recourse is certainly to the AMC in the first instance. If you're not getting satisfactory results from the AMC, I wouldn't be backward in CCing the ACMA into that. And I wouldn't be backward in CCing your local politician into it either. A bit of direct action never goes astray.
And both state and federal.
Correct.
And your approach to the state guy is, why is our University of Tasmania wasting money when they're short of money and complaining that they need more of it on outsourcing and doing the work of the federal government?
And only on a cost recovery basis.
Well, theoretically.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Yeah, make a profit, eh?
Yeah. And that would be my argument to the local guys would be, our university is wasting money on this.
So there is recourse. That's so. Yeah. But anyway, any other questions?
Do they have any time scale for what, once the consultation period is closed? Do they have any time scale on
No.
implementation?
No.
Has anybody told them they haven't given us enough information to make an informed decision?
I understand there has been that representation made. Not sure that much came back, but I understand that representation has been made. I wouldn't be surprised if they are prepared to entertain the thought of a revised class licence, there'll be another round of consultation.
That would be their only opportunity to try and redraft it in a more clever way to get what they wanted, yeah?
Yeah, well and true. And that's actually what we hope for. That would be probably the best outcome.
The three parties that I'm aware of are the WIA, well, forgetting the ACMA, but the WIA, the AMC, and then those other guys who I don't remember who they are. What is their position in this? What I'm trying to get to is it possible that the WIA can propose to assume a lot of this, because they're the largest organization, would be best to enforce it, and it would lower the cost at the ACMA, it would be amateur-friendly people, managing friendly amateurs, we hope.
A bit like what we had.
Exactly, yeah. Because the band plans are developed by the WIA effectively.
Correct.
So they're already doing a lot of this
Correct.
work.
Correct.
And it's quasi-policed by the amateurs themselves through.
So, well, this is the self-regulation
There's enough
stuff.
talent to have an official observer corps. I mean, and you know, intruder alert and all that stuff.
Well, we've got Intruder Watch now.
Yeah.
So extend that, but interesting concept, Larry.
But then, because of the Privacy Act and there's no details for the call sign, you wouldn't be able to find out if they're real or not. And
No,
if they did
we
find
can't.
out, you wouldn't be able to find out who they were or where they were.
And I think whoever ends up doing the call sign database is going to come up against so much in the privacy space that probably what you're going to get on the call sign database is a call sign and a name.
And a state.
And that's about it.
I'm not sure the name would be on there.
So I'm not sure it's going to, be helpful, but who knows? Who knows?
So it'd be interesting running contests. You could run 3 or 4 call signs.
Yeah.
Right.
You'd call yourself.
There's potential in that.
They use their own call sign.
Anyway. Okay.
All right.
If there's no more questions, thank you very much. I hope, please make a submission. If nothing else, please make a submission. So, yeah. Cool.